go ahead and I'm gonna first review RCB versus GreyMargin. Throughout the review, I'm periodically going to ask you some questions, so please be available to answer them.
Okay.
All right. So from the very first corner, I believe we see our first mistake.
Yeah,
And
I forgot which way to connect from.
that's fair. Generally speaking, when you can give up a cornerstone for the outside, usually connecting the outside stone is probably a better situation. Whoops. For example, if we play this way, we go into another Joseki, and white gets Sente.
Right.
Another situation is, black takes the outside and we take the corner. This would be another situation, but white also gets Sente. And the only problem with how this ended, I'm not saying it's terrible. You have you have a strong shape here. You're not going to die at any point. It's just now you have Sente, and we shouldn't play a move that's going to give our opponent Sente.
Okay.
And black doesn't have to respond to this, right?
Right.
So where would you prefer to have played?
I guess either an approach around R14 or an approach around D15.
Yeah. Well,
One
one of
those.
the corners would have been ideal. Yeah. So we push and our opponent was able to play here. This is also another situation where you have to take a look at the board, and you notice how all your stones are on one side of the board.
Yeah.
We should also take that time to play one of your suggestions, playing one of the corner approaches. That would have also been an ideal. For black, I can't, like, this is like for play style, but usually just splitting a large side probably isn't ideal, especially since you have such a large potential on the board. So for example, approaching probably would have been more. If you push white into playing more stones on the bottom here, you gain to profit on the other side of the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can I ask, what are you risking white making a very large moyo?
No.
I know that the timing is important, but that was my concern in jumping in there. I wanted to try to break the board into pieces rather than have it become more of a moyo type game.
Okay, so what that tells me is you're a very greedy player, and so essentially you're afraid of white playing something like 6 or something like L4 and L5. Ideally, you have to take a look at this and you have to think about who's better in this position. Sure, white has all the territory here, but you can still reduce even though these stones are here. So you still get the first move of playing on the upper side of the board. Oops, that's the wrong key. Of playing on the first side on the top side of the board, right? So now you're saying I've got 2 potential areas here. I can't go straight. I have 2 potential areas here, and you have to do something about both of them, compared to you just being able to later in the game. For example, you'd be able to play something at A or B. You can attach. You can just simply reduce. That would be fine too.
Right.
If you're a real expert at surviving, maybe C is an option. I don't recommend it unless you're a Chochi-kun, but this L3 is I want to say it's a very Q idea. Although pros do play it sometimes, it's just you're being passive. You're not being active on the board. And so now your opponent has the option of taking away the momentum on the board. But in the game, your opponent responded. So now the bottom left is very solid. I would have preferred if you had played this direction, just because you already have the outside stones.
Yeah.
And even though your corner is invadable, it's not very helpful for your opponent. For example, you're going to get a very thick outside. And in this position, you can either capture the stone or you can go ahead and attack the one stone. So your opponent would most likely have to answer on the bottom here or jump out. At that point, if your opponent does either one of those, you have free reign of the board. Your opponent can also Tanuki. That's a possibility. I just would have preferred you to play from the weaker side. There's a proverb that you should play away from thickness, and it applies here. All right, so continuing the game, we go from a Joseki situation. This is also another point you can think about playing more freely here, Gray, is you can actually just approach, and if your opponent takes the corner, you can take the side. And in this case, if you have a stone on the right side, you can play high. If you play here, and say we go for rather normal Joseki here, and you play something like this, and your opponent plays here, you can just extend to the side and you'll be fine. Because if your opponent tries to continue attack, you have enough ice space here to make a solid base. You'll be perfectly fine. But we decide to take these 4 points for a solid group. But you have to realize that if Black's able to play here, you don't really have a base. Because if you continue to nuking, I can play something like this and then attack. And if you take the one stone, that's all it is. It's one stone. So your group becomes very, very small when you limit the stone like this.
Okay.
So maybe in the future when you're playing in the opening, think about I don't know the proper term for this, but maybe think about the risk assessment of Tanukiing and seeing whether or not how many directions of mobility do your groups have, right? So as long as you have 3 directions to run a group, you can always Tanuki.
All
right. So we gave our opponent Sente twice here.
Yeah.
And at this point, I would say white is pretty behind, maybe 3-4 points. But that's not really a huge deal. You just have to play a lot more actively. For example, take the corner, approach. We got to do one of these. Okay, so you did do that. This is good. Okay. It's important. What do you think about this move?
I don't know, but at that point, I was just not really thinking.
Okay. So we're playing a lot of thick moves. This one's pretty mandatory. So these 3 moves in particular, they're pretty thick. On this one too, they're really thick, but they're not gaining you points, right? So you have strong groups,
but they're not useful.
That's all they are. They're just strong groups with maybe 4 or 5 points.
Yeah.
Your opponent played kind of slack here with this 3 space extension. If he had played here and then you played here, I would say that's necessary. But since your opponent played here, I think you can take the liberty of playing on the left side first.
Okay.
And for ICB, if you want to be really aggressive, you have to really push your opponent's shape and make them uncomfortable. When your opponent's uncomfortable, that's where mistakes start to happen. So, like, for example, your opponent can play here or they can play here, and you would be able to Tanuki both of them. And you'll notice how these stones are working well with these ones, and you're building something, right?
Right.
But you're also providing safety for these groups on the bottom. Okay, so we still got the jump, which is good. It's three lines over to where you could be gaining a lot more. That's another thick move. We're playing really slow here. I really need to see like this type of stuff. Otherwise, we're going to be in a lot of trouble in the early game. Just because Black is currently leading.
Yeah.
Like Black has this box here. Oops. and potentially has whatever this could be, and then has something here.
Right.
While this group probably has maybe 4 to 6 points here, minus 2 for the eyes. And if we just look at white, white has this and this. White doesn't have a lot of points.
Mm-hmm.
So I already showed you a move that you could play, like for example here.
Yeah.
But what other moves do you think white could play instead of the top move?
I think I ended up peeping at Q11 at some point.
Okay. What does Q11 do?
Well, I was hoping to divide the side a little.
Okay, so let's look at that real quick. Since you said you played it earlier. In this case, when black connects, you'll notice that black has 2 stones on the 5th line here,
Yeah.
and also has 2 stones on the 3rd line. So in order to actually disconnect black here, we would have to play something like this
Mm-hmm.
or something like this. But at that point, black
It's
still
too
has,
easy to box them in.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot more difficult to separate stones that are connected already.
Yeah.
Especially even if you play something as simple as this, I can just go ahead and attack you here,
Mm-hmm.
and my group is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
As black, I'm surrounding you on the outside, and you're having a little bit more trouble. If you try to say, for example, to cut me off, when you connect here, I can just take the side points and force this fight.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think Q11 is kind of like the right idea, but we're looking at the wrong part of the board.
Okay.
In this case, I think black stone. I would think just something here or here would be ideal for you.
Okay.
I don't know how to get rid of that one. I won't see. It won't go away. So potentially, playing A, B. You can also attach at C and build the top side. But at some point, you're not going to want to play Q11. You probably want to play D.
Okay.
All right. So we're playing thick shape. Black defends the corner. Essentially, what this does is if you play something like this, black's just going to get really thick on the outside, which means the right side is going to get way bigger.
Yeah.
Continue. Okay. For black, you're probably trying to connect, right? Or what were you trying to do with this move?
I knew that it would connect better at R13, but I was actually hoping to, after getting something like a connection, then attacking from the outside. And I think I actually was separated. I had the possibility to have been separated, I think. So what I tried didn't work, but I probably should have just gone at R13 if I wanted to connect.
Yeah, R13 would connect. You could also do a first line move. But if you're trying to attack, maybe just do it all right. Because if your opponent plays here, you can still connect. And you're not worried about this type of stuff because you're just going to be connected anyways. And then you can actually fight this. So your opponent can't immediately try to cut and kill. Otherwise, they're going to be surrounded. And it's very painful for white.
Right.
And there's also the fact that if your opponent tries to come out, you can just cut. So your opponents, they have to fix the cut somehow, either connect and then you're still connecting underneath.
Right.
And if they play something like this, then you can just either wedge, honey first, and
So
then
just
connect.
if I'm planning on boxing the opponent in or trying to give them something to worry about from the outside early on, I guess.
I'm not sure you need to box your opponent in. You just need to make them regret giving you outside stones. So, for example, in the variation that I showed earlier, if we play this way, our opponent tries to cut, we can still cut white on the top here, especially if they answer. Like something like this,
Yeah.
right? So they have to give up the outside stones, but you have a stone on 11. Even if they play here, you can cut the top stones.
Right.
Right? Even something as simple as maybe playing here is effective.
Okay.
Right? Because now what happened is white has a cut here or a double peep here, and these stones here are running in the center. There's also a possibility that your opponent may not try to cut you. So in this case, you can just connect.
Yeah.
And if they do cut you directly, you can just jump.
Okay.
Because they can probably try this. Maybe not jump. Maybe just play here, and then just reverts back.
Right.
It just you're exchanging this stone for this one. But it's the same thing. You can exchange 11, and then it's hard for white to effectively use these stones in the center.
Right.
Sometimes Go isn't always about boxes, but so here white. Okay, so if I think you're worried about something like this, right? Why trying
Yeah,
to cut
well,
you off
that would have been the cut, and then it's mainly the stones around R11, R10, and R11 that I was concerned I would have a target for white to chase.
Okay. I'm gonna have to say because you have a turn at A, your only concern right now should be whether or not you can punish white's mistake.
Okay.
So generally this move here isn't needed at the moment just because black played this move here at A. If, for example, if I play white, like, and I play here and my opponent adds a move, I've essentially turned this five line territory into second line territory. And I would be happy just for, have these two exchanges. Maybe I'll mark them differently. If you correlate the square stones with the triangle stones, I think white gained in this position, and then white can get the first move out here. If, for example, you decide to tanuki because you think it's not necessary, there is a chance for white to force you to come back to live in the corner.
Right.
And then your stones on the right side are in trouble. So the real menace here is playing at A.
Yeah.
And then white responding immediately. I mean, you can still push here, but you still need to come out. Just in like a general strategy is you want to force your opponent to add moves to their own territory to gain profit. Now you can just tanuki. You've already gained the profit of white having to respond locally. Now you get to take the first move on the other side of the board. And as black,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just be mindful of time so we can make it to all 3 games.
I think from here, black took really the big advantage here. Okay. Thanks for the reminder. I'll go through it. Okay, so eventually white got the first move, which is good. My only worry is white. You still have a connection problem between these two groups, A and B. I don't know whether that's going to come into view. And then you also have to realize that black's group here in the center is really thick. So when you invade on the side here, the sea stones are going to come under fire very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so your opponent attacked. So you notice how I said the black has thick stones here? We should just go ahead and try to live immediately.
Okay.
There's no points in the center. It's all dame. So at any point we're fighting in this board, it's all profit for black. just because you're going to be playing Indame and you're not going to be destroying his territory.
Okay.
Okay, so black played kind of like I'm going to gain more points here and attack you in the center. We should still try to make life here.
Okay.
I don't see any issue with the fight in the center that happened on the right side, but you're definitely finding problems with your group here. If you don't want to be cut, this shape has some serious issues. Black's going to be able to cut you later like this.
Mm,
So it's better to connect like this
okay.
in with the diagonal. You do have problems, but at this point, these two
I
stones
have
are
nothing
probably...
but problems.
Huh?
At this point, I have nothing but problems.
Yeah, you have to be really creative at this point in the game. We can't play slow moves like this one, just because our opponent can play a peep later. Like, if our opponent plays a peep now, then you should be happy. Take one stone, right? You can always reduce later.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I don't know how the game ended. How did it go?
I pretty much just resigned here.
Okay. I would say black is thickly ahead. The only way you would be able to come back in this game is if you were able to make something of the center here and you were able to reduce the corner with a move like this.
Yeah.
There's also this position here. You have a potential weakness with between these two stones,
Yeah.
because it's a 2 space rather than a 1 space.
Mhm.
Do you guys have any questions about the game?
No, thank you. I
No,
don't
thanks for the
anyways.
comments.
All right. Just in the opening, especially for white, we want to move away from playing really thick moves and try to play faster moves.
Okay.
And as for black, maybe take the advantage that you have control over the board and try to make it more of an advantage.
Got it.